It's become a trend over the years that video streaming is in the full sweep of producing niche original content for their sharing lineups, and the medium of animation is no exception. Just this year, Amazon Prime had Invincible.
You're fighting so you can watch everyone around you die! Think, Mark!
Netflix, well, just name one. And even Crunchyroll, a site for streaming anime content, made its debut with their lineup of shows either in association with a major studio or by their own studio. But none of these pitches were as big as the announcement for the original animated project, High Guardian Spice, back in 2018. But unfortunately for them, it wasn't for any good reasons. It was met with pushbacks from a large majority of people, criticizing the trailer for its lack of explanation surrounding the project and its aversion to elaborating what made their show a must-watch. To many, it was derivative and vanilla, and the interviews with the creatives and producers only muddled the murky waters behind its inception. Thus, the project went silent for the next 2.5 years until finally making its virtual debut to the ravenous mob that awaited it. When I heard about the controversy surrounding it and the eventual release, I honestly didn't really care. But of course, FOMO kicked in and I eventually cleared my schedule and months of isolation from my YouTube upload page because algorithm be damned, I wanted to see and discuss it. And as a final report on the first season, it's not the worst, but it's still bad. The story of High Guardian Spice centers around 4 girls going to a high school that teaches combat, spellcasting, and any adherence to lawsuits that would put these students in mortal danger.
Did you enjoy your poison?
The girls consist of Rosemary, the clumsy warrior.
Whoa, Parsley, have you been rolling in mulch?
Sage, the book-smart mage.
This is an open lab, Amaryllis. Use it if you want.
Parsley, the dwarven blacksmith.
Welcome! You two must be Noodle and Garth.
And Thyme, the fearless ranger.
Might want to watch where you swing that thing because of how it's a giant sword.
And across 12 episodes, the group goes through situations that most magic schools go through, like orientation, boy love, euthanizing serpents of the deep. You know, typical of the genre. Just throw in Mandy from Totally Spies and some ham-fisted morals about the meaning of love, and you got a show made for younger, or I mean older audiences, only meant for mature audiences. But before I get into the good and the many bads of the show, I probably want to point out how it became, well, High Guardian Spice. Ray Rodriguez is the creator of the show, and has pitched it for many years to various productions, and that included his first attempt in 2013 to Channel Federator, which was, as he states, a good learning experience for him. Since that first pitch, I used Rosemary in my college thesis film Treasure Hunt, and then continued to develop HGS and pitch it every opportunity I got. Eventually, I pitched it to Crunchyroll in 2016, and they liked it a lot, though they didn't have the bandwidth at the time to make it as a show. We started developing it as a comic in 2017, then I repitched it as a show to them when Marge Dean started the company in 2018, and it quickly changed from comic to TV show. It was a very unusual process. Crunchyroll Studios, formerly known as Elation Studios, lauded itself for being an ethnically diverse crew with a 50% female majority and an entire writing staff of women. A few of whom even have prominent voice roles in the series, including Katie McVeigh as mean girl Amaryllis.
Don't worry, I'm here. At ease, pores.
And Ray Rodriguez as Professor Caraway, who in the show is transgender. I'm a queer Cuban trans guy, so we're in the similar boat, says Rodriguez to feature editor Jade King for The Gamer. Having diverse representation is very important to me in the work I create.
I'm transgender.
For Ray, it was a chance to make his idealized setting in a high fantasy world a reality, a reflection of his childhood wonders. I have been a big anime fan for a long time. My older sister got into Sailor Moon before I was born, so I have always had anime around in my life. Rodriguez even notes other anime as inspiration to High Guardian Spice, such as Magic Knight Rayearth, Petite Princess Yusi, and interestingly enough, Little Witch Academia. Combining anime aesthetics with the squishy style of Western shows such as She-Ra and Steven Universe were most likely the reason for the art style being a hybridization of Western and Eastern animation. So with all that said, how does this apply to the show itself? Well, do you guys remember that Jeb Bush clip during his failed campaign? It's like that, only with the writing staff.
Please clap.
Tropes have been around for years, and no matter how original a work of art might be, it can be directly lifted from an artist's influences, like Indiana Jones from 1930s matinee serials, or Halloween from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. It's a group of young teenagers going to a school made for exceptionally gifted students trying to learn the core of their crafts so that they can become the best at their niche job requirements. This is your wizarding school trope, very much popularized by Harry Potter, and in North America brought in a slew of heavily inspired YA works, essentially playing as portals that vicariously place young impressionable folks to live out their flight of fancy in an environment most familiar to them, school. High Guardian Spice's Hook is a magical school where everyone of different races, classes, and even genders can enter, unless you're too big to enter the dorms, or you're a fish person. I guess you'll have to go somewhere different for that one. It's the unfortunate conundrum that all creators want in their story, having your cake and wanting to eat it too. It wants to be like many teenage fantasy works, but instead comes out as an eldritch horror of every young adult cliche under the sun. For example, the main hero has a missing parent who may or may not be in connection with a dark council, who has a quiet, awkward friend who is part of a family line of exceptional mages. They have to take a train to their destination and come across several friends, including a no-nonsense, long-haired girl and a pretentious know-it-all who may or may not be connected to the antagonists. There are also the eccentric professor with links to the missing parental figure, and an animal that transforms into a human being who has a bond with one of the characters that attempts to destroy the academy and bring about an age of darkness. At least there is no Voldemort? Simply put, it's a paint-by-numbers magical school show with an identity crisis. It wants to be the mirror to others of its makeup, but can't figure out what it wants to be. The only standout feature is the concept of old magic clashing with new magic. Old magic is simply using oneself as a conductor to pull magic from their surroundings, while new magic simply captures that essence and uses it in a device like a terrastone or glyph. And for Sage, it's a journey for her to find a balance between old and new that is her arc across 12 episodes.
She despises new magic. She doesn't want me to use it. Everyone at school makes fun of me or laughs behind my back because of my old sigils and my stupid hat.
Which leads me to... Believe it or not, there are some net positives to the show that I want to address before getting into the rotting roots that envelop its base. One is that despite its awkward characterizations, they do have some interesting arcs. I've already mentioned Sage's arc, but you also have the character of Snapdragon, who is going through various changes in his life when it comes to his gender identity.
I like your nails. Would you still like me if I painted my nails?
In the two-part Halloween episodes, he is seen being more feminine by wearing a dress, despite the fear of raising eyebrows from other people. His journey of self-discovery is the best character arc of the show, as he grows to appreciate his own desires as who he truly is inside. The show is also good at representing healthy LGBTQ+ representations, even though there are a few gripes with it that I'll get into in a bit.
You protected a precious creature, and that let it find its perfect partner. And that matters so much.
And hands on the table, it does get better by around the time our Spice Girls goes out to different locations and face some very interesting challenges, but can also be seen as a missing angle that the show desperately needed to stay afloat. But before we get invested into its quote-unquote world, you need to have subtitles in order to understand what the hell's going on. Starting from episode 1, the quality issues are already apparent from not a visual view, but an auditory ear. Dialogue is completely overblown by sound effects and music, and during the introduction, I couldn't tell if my volume settings were low or just too high.
Bye, Dad. Bye, Chicory.
Goodbye, Pebble! And hello to the rest of our lives.
In terms of sound mixing, it's definitely one of the worst aspects of the show. And that's before we get into when the character actors deliver their lines.
Do you want rabies? We don't know if this one's dangerous.
I was sure I was gonna have to fight her to defend your honor. Sage got me to be patient, like she always usually does.
While some notable actors like Barbara Goodson, Cam Clark, and Stephanie Shea perform adequately well in their roles, the others have performances I would say are amateur at best, laughably terrible at worst.
Hi, Parsley! This'll dare me to become a gargoyle!
I'm going to move you to the third year class. Is that okay?
Oh, Rosemary. I'll show you something.
Some are newcomers with little to no voice acting experience, while others are given roles that are very much not in their depth of field. There is even a character named Slime Boy, voiced by Julian Coster, who I think might be better as a musician than a voice actor.
Oh, she's out back. She's elbow deep in turnip. That's what everyone calls me. I kind of like that. It's just saying slime and then boy. I was just gonna practice a crying song I wrote. I'm doing, bard stuff for everything hours. Yeah, okay, all right.
There are plenty of times throughout the show where the voice directions sometimes don't even match the character's tone of voice. Rosemary sounds very raspy in the beginning of the show.
Chewing is for cowards. Oh my word! What is that? Maybe it's got rabies.
But suddenly sounds more soft and clear after episode 3.
The cave eats students? That sounds like a good adventure.
Aster, please let me do this. I'm on it, kiddo. I'll keep you posted, okay?
And due to the audio levels being low for so many of the cast, it only applies gasoline to the fire, and oh my goodness does it stick out.
Asked him to not be a jerk.
You probably thought she's just a regular girl, nothing to notice, but Rhubarb's like really good at this stuff.
You could say that, or you could say you've been excelling at the use of one tool.
And even when you can hear what the characters are saying, and with passing audio levels, it's when the real culprit unveils itself like a wet fart.
You girls want any food?
Is sleep a food?
Rewind back to the first episode again, as our two main protagonists are leaving their home. They stand on a hill looking out towards the sunset, excited and nervous in starting out on their journey to the academy. Rosemary makes a stumble, and the parents coincidentally are waiting for them outside the gates. Couldn't you just walk them down the road? They do their standard goodbyes, and Sage's mom then says,
And remember, studying is just as important as socializing.
and this is the level of writing we're experiencing here. And the first episode makes it very clear that the writing staff didn't go through the necessary drafts to make the episode plotline flow better. Take the traveling scene where we start off on a horse-drawn carriage to an even bigger double-decker carriage by the time the opening credits end. Then we cut to an elevator system that takes us up a mountain, and by now I'd hoped they'd flesh out our main leads, but instead insert a Hogwarts train for the girls to then fly a broom to get on boards? What? So I'd ask, why didn't we just use the broom to get to our destination? Not only would that be far more interesting, but it could cut out all the travel filler. Now, it would lessen the world building aspect a little, but since it's frankly pretty small scale anyways, it would be better used to understand our characters' personalities. The only characteristics I've been presented with is that one is headstrong and clumsy, while the other is cautious and, I guess, introverted? Instead, we have no way to identify or understand who they are as individuals aside from their first appearance in the story. Are we supposed to be captivated by how long it takes to get to that one town you've seen in multiple fantasy anime? After 5 minutes of what should have just been a Skyrim fast travel, we are then introduced to Sage's cousins and enter into their house up to the stairs. And when asked what Rosemary wants to eat, she responds with,
Is sleep a food?
but I guess Rose just doesn't need anything, nor Sage for that matter, so the offering of food is considered a lie. No response from even Sage, which makes this exchange just another throwaway line spoken for the sake of a confusing joke. Then our girls sleep, with Rosemary having a bad dream of her mother being tentacled to death, which she doesn't look too distraught about. In a confusing line of action, her mother throws the sword to Rose, to which she tries to pick up but fails, runs towards her mom until she is yanked by the tendrils into the sky, where the sword that was behind Rose a moment ago is now in front of her, and she just curls down and weeps.
She always comes home.
Even during the dream, the dialogue is shoddy and basic as we're given no insight into what the mother figure is to Rosemary. She is important to her life, but how so? In future episodes, she gives off the impression that she doesn't even know what her mother even smells like, which is kinda creepy either way, despite being not too young to remember her.
Were you close? Was she amazing? What did she smell like?
On that note, Caraway is a best friend to Rosemary's mom, so why has the mom never mentioned Caraway? So then the mother just comes off as just another tragic parental guardian who becomes pretty irrelevant until the very end. The show from beginning to end is like this. Having bad dialogue is one thing, but when the screenplay doesn't follow any cohesive pathway nor lead into any payoffs, you know it's a lack of screenwriting knowledge that is really felt here. Let's skip ahead to another example at episode 8 during the Festival of Fall. Snapdragon's being talked down to by this asshole for going drag.
Wait, Snapdragon? You, dude, why are you dressed like a girl?
And his friend comes in to defend him in his costume choice. But then when we see them again, the visuals imply they are being introduced for the first time. You can even hear a sparkling sound effect.
Oh, it's you.
Cut to their next appearance, and Snapdragon is visibly still distressed from the "did you assume my gender" scene, and then Amaryllis is sitting down with them and going over what happened. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the way it's structured means that only then was the Cal incident brought up again, and that was when a big fight broke out between Rose and Sage. Maybe also this line from Amaryllis?
Can you imagine how many horrible insults they've been saving up? Let's watch.
Wouldn't it make sense for the scene with them at Parsley's family tent to take place first, then have Cal's inappropriate interaction with Snapdragon be the next one up? Now it flows a lot better with context since he is still distressed from it. Then again, it would have worked fine here if only the way it was written wasn't implicating a costume reveal. There are many scenes written this way that don't make overall sense in the narrative, and it's also really not helping them with engagement either. It also complicates matters when the tone of High Guardian Spice is out of whack with what is presenting. Remember that warning sign at the beginning of each episode? Well, despite its cute designs and wholesome atmosphere in the prologue, the show can be about as bloody as a shonen and have a mouth like a sailor at very inappropriate times.
This is for trapping me, you bastard! Fine, but this is grog shit and you know it!
It's very off-putting when a show with basically no teeth all of a sudden has bits where creatures are bursting like water fountains, or a character makes fun of another character's drawing style because it looks like dicks.
Not believe how many dogs Rosemary drew in her diary.
Oh, and by the way, you draw swords like dogs.
Hey!
Because that is what I think most people signed up for. It's not even a good subversion since it only starts coming out by episode 3 as if the stakes weren't high enough. It's the very definition of tonal whiplash. And on the subject of episode 3, it's also the first development of one of the key morals in the show. And if the writing doesn't ruin your immersion, it also ruins the LGBTQ+ content. The scene in episode 3 with Caraway describing the very textbook definition of being transgender to Rosemary is the one most people make fun of. How can you write LGBTQ+ themes in your story without coming across as hammy or sanctimonious? Cartoons, and especially ones being made for kids, are a growing trend in representing the voices of the visible and invisible minorities of our society, and showing how they are all a part of the human condition, depicting them as those in need of love and acceptance. It's not just showing on-screen chemistry where two of similar binary genders are in romantic relations, but that even those going against binary roles are to be celebrated. Now, despite that, it doesn't mean you can just shove a gay character into your marketing and present yourself as someone who's with it. Disney has been doing that for years with their writing, and if you want more on that, I'll refer you to Lindsay Ellis's video on this subject. If you want examples of shows with great representations and appropriate care done to their messages and storylines, you can mostly find them in media aimed at preteens. Steven Universe,
Steven, Connie! I did it! You did it?
She-Ra,
Don't you get it? I love you. I always have.
Owl House,
Do you want to go out with me? No, I was so ready. I'm sorry, you can say it.
these are perfect examples of shows that have put a lot of attention not only on their characters, but also to their progression and place in the narrative. Then what about High Guardian Spice? Why can't it hang out at the cool kids table? Is it society or the gross men talking down to it? While that might be complicated, I personally don't think misogyny or Christian fundamentalists are solely responsible for the downvotes or one-star reviews. Maybe some, but I can't exactly find any evidence to support it. But instead, it's again back to the same problem. The writing is just bad at representation. Or it's pointing out the obvious to a demographic who are being spoon-fed information they're old enough to know. Again, intended for mature audiences. This isn't a show about a little kid discovering the importance of loving who they are and what it means to transform into the body they desire to be in. This is a show that has a character give a literal Wikipedia definition of the topic to our main heroine in a fantasy show where transformation magic is a thing. And while it comes down to execution, it's also something that is a lot harder to grasp in a fantasy setting than a modern day environment. In fact, there are some issues that the show can take advantage of that can work in fantasy. Classism is one of them, though nothing is done with it. There is also racism and prejudice that can be explored, and that can be apparent in most story-driven tales valued by those over the age of 13. And with no religious organization or group opposed to identity or attraction in this story, it's very hard to figure out what the problem is other than obligatory pandering. I have no problem with the fact that Anise and Aloy are happily married and of the same sex. I just find it kind of funny though that they put a picture frame of their marriage in the guest room than in any room in the house. Bottom line, don't be patting yourselves on the back for doing the bare minimum when other shows with gay themes can work it better than you can on the runway. It's not X-Arm, and Lord knows anything is better than that. But High Guardian Spice's animation isn't getting any brownie points from me. While most scenes are still dictated by how the screenplay expects the characters to interact with the world, the animation tries to tell you that this environment is alive and well, when most of the time, it's a moving screensaver. The backgrounds are sometimes even missing several features like how the bread and lampposts are just out of place against the backdrop, or how in Rose's dream sequence, the characters feel like they're placed on the same windy valley layout in each shot despite their positions from the overhead. While the Unity asset flips don't appear much in the rest of the show, they still don't make this universe any less different from your typical high fantasy playbook. The rest of the animation is something of a mixed bag. It flows together pretty well for your average animated TV show, but its cut corners are pretty apparent. The one thing I can say shares a lot of similarities with Japanese animation, but their excuse is that they have to release episodes on a weekly basis and have to make necessary sacrifices. This is a show that had more time to develop and implement fluid animation, yet chose to go for the bare minimum. It also has this weird issue where the animation will just stop altogether and take 3 or more seconds for the transition to happen. Roughly half of the scene transitions are a crossfade, and you can tell when it's about to happen because the characters look like they're about to play a telegraph game of freeze tag. But it could be just the method in which the show was put together in post that deteriorates the design process, because I do find its characters appealing and distinct in their looks. And even the action can be engaging at certain points. But the takeaway is that much unlike its inspirations, it's not showcasing the best of what it can be. Shows like She-Ra, with a very similar character aesthetic, make the most out of their animation budget and go beyond its limitations to create several imaginative scenarios for the story to delve into. In High Guardian Spice, most of it is stuck in a school with very little exploration or setting changes. The only time we go anywhere new is in episode 11 when the group helps out some mermaids from a rampaging sea monster. It's kind of a ringing indictment that while magic school settings are naturally cost effective, it lacks innovation or growth in what show you want to present, and is the reason why some of the more successful animated projects prosper without the use of this monotonous device. However, She-Ra might be a bridge too great for equal comparison. And if we need to send it home somehow, allow another stand-in to take its place. That's right. It's time to talk about RWBY. RWBY is an online animated series created by Monty Ohm and Rooster Teeth Productions, best known for Red vs. Blue and a variety of okay to forgettable side hustles. It's about a group of young teenagers going to a school made for exceptionally gifted students, trying to learn the core of their craft so that they can become the best at their niche job requirements.
Second verse, same as the first.
It was also made by its producers as a homage to Japanese animated works and based its world on the grim fairy tales of old. Hunters are much like Guardians, as each one has their own different styles and weaponry to fight the monsters and villains of the series. It mostly cements our characters initially into situations centered around the school, and how it will affect the wide scale of the universe it is formed in. RWBY was released in 2013, and by that point, the landscape has already been oversaturated with similar high fantasy concepts that take place, of course, in an educational institution, all aimed at a young teenage audience, and during the time when animation from Japan was seeing a massive surge of popularity. The creators chose the right time to market a show for that demographic, and has since been their biggest show of all time. Now, of course, RWBY doesn't smell like roses. The animation is shoddy, the main casts aren't interesting, and the storylines are generic even by early 2010 standards. However, it was also using new technology with very complex techniques, not seen on web series up until this point. On top of being advertised well and scoring more fanfare and profit than any other independent project at the time, RWBY has already made its shot in the market. This was the exact situation High Guardian Spice was looking for in order to cash in on RWBY's success. But by modern metrics, they were just too late. RWBY's popularity was dwindling per season, and the audience was looking towards more fresh avenues to stimulate their pleasures. They've begun to outgrow shows about cute high school girls doing badass things. But if we really want to make a comparison between each series' first season, RWBY has a much better hook. Its action is a lot more exaggerated due in part to the creator's experience and over-the-top antics, and the execution of its wild ideas cohesively fit with the story they want to tell. A scythe that turns into a rapid velocity sniper rifle fits well into the realm of cool, and the red trailer for RWBY makes its marketing far more realized than the Limp Toast HGS trailer. I can't deny that RWBY is the textbook example of how to market your show, as it gives the audience what they want, while High Guardians tries to present what it could be. It's a classic show don't tell, or as Chekhov put it, don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on the broken glass. Not to say that RWBY was a critical darling, as it certainly has several problems that affects its long-term appeal. You want more of that, I'd say go check out H. Bummer Guy's video on it. But keep in mind how fresh it was when it came out of the oven during the early 2010s. High Guardian Spice tried to win an audience it didn't know wasn't there anymore, and all that and more is partially why their build-up to a second season will probably never get produced. Which is kind of sad if you ask me. In episode 11, Snapdragon confronts the same student that mocked his choice of wardrobe back at the fall festival and gets into a fight with him. Professor Caraway then takes Snap aside and talks to him about what his troubles are. He and Snapdragon have a heart-to-heart about their experiences and how Caraway learned to love himself after his transition.
Snapdragon, you have time to figure it out. There are so many paths to becoming your true self, and this one is mine. I'm not saying that it's yours.
And I think this scene in particular highlights the main reason for the show's inception. Ray Rodriguez wanted to make a show that could speak to a young teen going through the process of transitioning genders and how it can genuinely make you happy. All art, regardless of its end result, is made with good intentions in mind. Not from corporate boards, but from the pen of someone who truly wants to tell a personal story. High Guardian Spice is a story that speaks to someone's love for shows and anime that represent what they've gone through in their adolescence. Maybe it could have worked as a light action adventure show where the characters go to school to learn fighting and magic. It could have worked as a tale of self-discovery and passion. But we must always be careful with how it eventually ends up. And I can speak from experience. I made Halo Machinima back in the day, and I honestly don't put it up in high regard anymore. I made several mistakes and was chasing a trend that I thought was spectacular, but was kinda, well, cringy. It's a discovery that's hard to accept, and that for many creations to fully work, It's sometimes on the advice of constructive criticism that can open up the big picture, not from a committee of yes people. It's a balancing act, and sometimes you will have ideas that won't see the light of day. And even when an artwork you make doesn't surpass expectations, you have learned from it. Rodriguez went far and away in making his dream a reality. It just was a bit too late to the party. But despite that, it's not all bad news. Ray is still working in the industry and is said to be working on a new show, so I don't think the failure of this one will hinder any progress he has made in his career. His first as a showrunner was a flop, but I'm confident in saying that Ray can certainly recover from it. High Guardian Spice is another drop in the bucket for Crunchyroll's original content that was killed by poor marketing and a lack of oversight. And that's before it even came out. When it did, it became an underwhelming piece of media that became clogged with unimpressive visuals, a by-the-numbers plot, and writing that affects the story, characters, and principles. I try my best not to nitpick every single microscopic detail, as it would only make some arguments redundant and unclear, but I wanted to highlight how a passion project turned into a mess of warped expectations. Not sure if another season's been picked up yet, which I'd be amazed if it were, but I only wanted to get my opinions out there on where things went wrong. High Guardian Spice might be the base ingredients for a decent brew, but unlike the title, it neglected to add in any spice. Thanks for watching, I hope you guys enjoyed, and let me know what your thoughts are about High Guardian Spice. Comment down below and subscribe if you want to see more content whenever I get the chance to upload. It's your bra man, signing off.